This is lecture 1 for EH 101, Good Interpretation and So What, and the 7 Common Moves. Today we're going to be laying the groundwork that we're going to utilize throughout the rest of the semester. I'm going to teach you what interpretation is, and then 7 moves that you can make in your writing to share your interpretation of objects and things with others. So, to write an essay, you can't just convey information. You have to interpret it. And we interpret everything that we see. We interpret photographs, we interpret text messages. We read these things from text and non-text objects, and we interpret the weather conditions by going outside and looking up at the sky. We can look at someone's face or how they dress or how they talk and interpret their personalities and moods by these observations. But just because it's an obvious interpretation doesn't necessarily make it interesting enough to write about. Good writers can make any subject interesting, even a telephone book, but they're able to do that because they're able to tap into a so what factor. It's an original element in this interpretation that they're making, and that's where your energy comes from in your essay. So the biggest question that you have to ask yourself at the beginning of your writing is, what is it that I want my readers to believe, to understand, or to feel about what I'm discussing? One way that you can learn to write well is by imitating other writers. But this part of the process isn't always easy. When we read a book, we see the very best, the very finished product that a writer has to give. We don't see that process that they go through, the many mistakes that they made, the paper that they throw away or delete off of a computer. We just see that final polished package at the end, and we interpret that as, oh, these ideas just traveled from their brain to the page. But writing is not like that. It's a process. So normally we see straight through the moves that writers make directly to the meaning. We read for information. We read for fun. We're not really thinking about what goes into the writing. We just know whether a book is good or if it's not, or if it makes us happy or sad. These moves are purposeful. They want us to react without us being aware of these moves. It's kind of like things in a fishbowl. Like, you tend to notice just the fish. You don't notice the environment that the fish is in, the fact that there's actually water in there, and they may have a little castle. We see, when we zoom in and we see the fish, and I'm going to teach you to see things as a whole picture. Where it's drawn past that surface, so that we can see that fish, our attention is. But to learn to write, we have to learn to notice the bowl itself, what keeps this little ecosystem running to make the whole thing possible. So let's talk about this idea that every good writer has 7 common moves that they use to be successful, to make a successful essay. Every piece of good writing has a beginning, it has an ending, detail, organization and plot, style, voice and attitude, and economy. And we're going to look at each of these individually. Your handout that you have on mastering essay elements are these next few slides are just kind of in condensed form on that handout if you want to kind of follow along. So every good essay has to have a beginning. Beginnings are different from a start. The first thing that a writer writes down on a piece of paper is the start. A beginning is actually purposeful. It's what you finally select to kind of run the show of your paper. So the beginning is different than the start. We have to have a good beginning in order to rope our readers into what we are writing. Now, our readers have no vested stock in what it is that you are writing about. You have to make them create that interest to draw them into what you're writing about. So a beginning is going to build expectations for what's to come in the essay and help keep your audience engaged. There's many things that you can do to do an exemplary beginning. You can begin with a quote. You want to make sure that you don't overuse quotes in general, but that's always a good way to start. An anecdote, a little brief intro to a story, a personal story, to help your reader make a connection. Be mysterious. Keep them guessing until they find out later on in the piece what it is that you're talking about, referencing something else that's already in print, striking metaphors or dramatic statements, shocking statements, starting in the middle of the story in media res. So it's a Latin term which means you kind of start in the middle and then flash back to the beginning. It kind of draws your reader into the action. A provocative thesis or a generalization or a partial event, an opening scene. Not only is a good beginning important, a good ending is also important. Sometimes we tend to overlook the ending. Especially writing for school or whatever, you kind of like float along and you put all of your passion, your soul into the beginning and the introduction, and then your body paragraphs, and then you kind of leave the little skimp at the ending because you're tired or you just run out of things to say. A well-constructed essay doesn't stop. Just stop. It's closure. It ends. It has a sense of being final. So you want to create that sense of closure, though, without bringing in any new material or leaving your reader with unanswered questions. A few of the ways that you can use to go out in style, to end in style: leave the reader with a powerful image or a statement, a startling revelation. You could use a paragraph of reflection. You could return to the gimmick that you used in the beginning, that list that we talked about, the one that started with the quotes, and then closing a loop. It's kind of like bringing it full circle. Good essays also have detail, so you like to think of an essay as just a well-constructed cheeseburger. Your ending and your beginning are your top and bottom buns, and then all of your kind of accoutrement that you throw in there, your condiments. Everything plays an important role in creating that perfect cheeseburger. So if the beginning and ending are your buns, your details are really the meat of your burger, the beef of your burger. They have to be interesting and plentiful, but it can't be too excessive. If the patty is too big, then it ruins the burger, and if it's too small, it leaves you wanting more. So choosing those details is a deliberate move that will make you a better writer. And you have to select them. It's purposeful in a way to keep your audience interested. You want to balance showing and telling. Showing is when you lead a reader to see and hear things for themselves. They make assumptions based off of what's in the text. Telling is actually physically writing it out so they can see it on the paper there in front of them. You want to use the five senses as much as you can to help create that mental image for your reader. A good essay has to have organization. It has to have plot. Plot is not just something that you learned in 4th or 5th grade, the plot mountain, when you drew it out, where you have a beginning and a climax and an end. Plot is a continuous sense of unfinished business that keeps your reader interested from the first sentence all the way to the last sentence, including a thesis statement, either stated or implied, that lets the readers know what's up, what's happening in your story, including topic sentences in each of your body paragraph that refer back to the thesis and tie everything together. Using transition words and phrases, and not just simple transition words that you use when you learn how to write, like I'm going to tell you today about my childhood bedroom. First, second, third. It's more developed than that. I'm going to teach you how to use more powerful transitions. And then keeping that organization all the way through. A couple of things that you can do: organizational strategies in your paper, chronological order, things in order of time from the beginning to the end. And if you're telling a story, obviously chronological makes sense. Spatial: when you walk into a room, visually, your eyes are drawn in a spatial direction. You look going in one direction, maybe left to right or up to down. It's a spatial arrangement, and you can carry that throughout your writing. And then there's progressive, which is least to most important, most to least importance. This is also referred to importance. organization. And you can use a combination of these things. You're not roped into just one or two of these. Style is unique to every writer. Style is making moves to be more efficient, more pleasing, more powerful than just ordinary speech. And every person has their own unique style. Sometimes these things leap off the page and grab your attention. Sometimes they're very subtle, but very powerful. They make a powerful statement. You can use figurative language, word choice, style. You can, and varying your sentence structure to be more stylistic, and those are all purposeful as well. Figurative language, obviously, the ones that you're really familiar with, like simile and metaphor, those kinds of things, but also trying new styles as well, new figurative language to kind of amp up your writing. Using active voice. If you don't know the difference between active and passive, if I were to throw the ball to you, Miss Lloyd throws the ball, that's an active construct, an active sentence. When you are not actively performing the action, the ball was thrown to Miss Lloyd, I didn't throw the ball, it was thrown to me. That is a passive construct. So you want to avoid passive as much as possible. Using precise creative action verbs instead of linking verbs. Linking verbs being your be verbs, and they're also called the dead verbs because they really don't do anything. Am, is, are, was, and were. They don't perform any action. They just connect things together. I'm not saying you can't use them. I just think that you should use them sparingly. Using precise language, varying your sentence patterns, using appropriate narration style, and avoiding second person you unless it's appropriate to your task and purpose. Voice and attitude. Essays need to sound like you. Your essays need to sound like you. Your voice needs to come out of your writing. And you can do that in a way that is appropriate to task and purpose, but it needs to sound like you. It doesn't need to sound like a robot. It doesn't need to sound like something you're trying to impress me as your audience with. It needs to sound like you as an individual. And they have attitudes, that's your treatment of the subject that you're talking about, whether you're happy or reflective or whatever. That attitude also needs to be consistent throughout the entire essay. Don't be afraid to use the first person pronoun I. This semester is the only time that I'll tell you that because these are personal essays. You can use I. I need it to sound like you. You just don't need to use you. Like you should feel this, or you want to avoid that. But you can feel free to use I. Let your readers know how you feel about your subjects. You're going to make that connection if you're emotional, and I'm not saying emotional as in sad, just any kind of emotion or feelings. Your reader is more likely to connect with what you are, what you're writing about. And that attitude should remain appropriate and consistent throughout your essay. This is the last one of the common moves, and it's of critical importance. I mean, they're all very critical. Economy. Good writers avoid fluff. They avoid filler. You want to avoid things that have no purpose. You don't want to be redundant by giving the same information twice. And if I were to chop up a well-constructed essay, when I would be able to piece it back together perfectly because it fits tight like a jigsaw puzzle. When you get a box of a puzzle, every piece has a purpose, and without the purpose, it doesn't make the whole. And this is what economy is like. Pull one letter or one word out of a really economical essay, and you'll know that something is missing. Good writers are very stingy. They get the most said in the fewest words. Good writers that are economical use active voice. They avoid the be verbs that we talked about, those dead verbs. They weed out useless and irrelevant details and unnecessary words. They avoid which and that. 9 times out of 10, when you use which or that, you tend to ramble on. Trying to string together a series of details, and so you want to make purposeful statements that avoid which and that unless it's absolutely necessary. And there's no fluff or filler. The final thing in this particular topic is a so what factor. Every essay has to have a so what factor. This is that creative, interesting take that makes it appealing to every reader, even those who may have not been initially interested in your subject. It's going to present your so what factor presents an interpretation that isn't obvious to everyone. It's an original element in your essay, and you're just sharing this interesting element with your audience. You're going to make it relatable, make it connect to them on a level that makes them want to read it. Couple of thoughts before I close off. Don't expect instant success. You already know how to write. I get that you've been writing at this point. As seniors, you've been writing for quite some time. However, learning to write well is a process. Okay? You're going to make mistakes. You are going to have to work at it. We talked about that at our first meeting. You are going to have to also be willing to accept constructive criticism. The very first time I wrote an essay, I was in college. I was a pretty confident writer going into. I love to write. I wrote a lot of stories when I was younger. Going into college, though, my first assignment was to write about some kind of event from childhood, and I wrote about when my grandfather married my step grandmother, who every member of the family hated, and she had tattooed on eyebrows. She was horrible woman. And it was funny and it was powerful, and I used these details and I was so proud of it, and I take it in I'm just drop it on the desk like a mic drop, and like, this is golden, and I get it back and it's bleeding red. And at first I was shocked. I was like, she's taken my treasure and turned it into trash. But the more that I looked at what she was writing, she was editing it for, the more I realized that she was being constructive to help me get better. And I took those criticisms and I poured them into the next essay that I wrote, and then the next essay and the next essay. And as a process, it got better. And the last thing is, think of yourself as a writer. Even if you're hesitant starting out, your perspective is important. Your perspective on your subjects is important and it's critical. And if you think of yourself as a writer, and you will care about the subjects that you're talking about, you are going to relate that to your reader through your writing.